mean to see what others missed? That's the question behind this episode title. After Charlie Kirk's assassination in September, there was shock and grief and outrage and immediate attempts to explain what happened. Some accounts pointed to a lone gunman, a rooftop shooter that snapped from a nearby building. That's the official line so far. FBI investigations, forensic evidence from rooftop traces, and video captured just after the shot all support the claim that there is a suspect in custody, but there are some public voices, including Candace Owens, who challenged that surface narrative almost immediately. She said she saw a pattern, small anomalies, odd timing, suspicious social media posts, alleged donor pressure against Charlie, things that fit a broader context rather than random chaos. Her claim is that maybe the official story does not tell the whole story. Obviously, I cannot convict anyone and I don't have any evidence of any kind, and I'm not really here for that. My function today is to listen, compare, and test because as believers, we are commanded to test all things. We can explore what we have so far and hope that it turns out to be the truth in this investigation. But I guess time will tell. The truth always comes out, right? So, what kinds of anomalies did Candace point out early on? Well, first, she highlighted serious failures in security preparation surrounding the event. According to an Associated Press review after the shooting, the courtyard at Utah Valley University lacked key public safety measures. There were no bag checks or metal detectors, no drone surveillance or of rooftops, only a handful of campus police officers present, and the setup left multiple tall buildings directly overlooking the outdoor amphitheater where Charlie spoke. Critics, including some campus public safety veterans, described the layout as dangerously exposed, saying the vulnerability was egregious enough that someone could take advantage and strike. So when Candace raises alarms about how exposed Charlie was, not just physically, but also institutionally, that concern has grounding in what is already public record. It's documented oversight. Second, Candace raised questions about what was said or what changed quickly after the tragedy. In high profile cases, when emotions are raw and information is scarce, public narratives tend to consolidate fast. Media outlets pick up official statements, police briefings, social media explodes, and that is exactly what happened after Charlie's death. Within hours, we had a suspect named, charges filed, press conferences, and multiple media summaries. But that speed, she warned, can mask uncertainty. Independent observers, including open source investigators who reviewed maps and rooftop angles, pointed out that the building that allegedly housed the sniper had multiple vantage points. It had blind zones and limited prior oversight. A few YouTube based analysts dissected the publicly released video, cautioning that while the rooftop view seemed plausible, the escape route and timing left unanswered questions. They weren't necessarily making accusations, they were asking for clarity. That's good faith. As believers, we are taught to walk in truth and light, not rush to conclusions before all facts are considered or assessed. Now, we consider the fact that dissenting voices often spot structural inconsistencies faster than official investigations, and sometimes for good reason. Institutional investigations have legal thresholds, burdens of proof, and procedures that slow down public disclosure. Evidence must be examined, witnesses have to be interviewed, and charges need to be reviewed thoroughly. That means early public narratives tend to be cautious, even incomplete. Meanwhile, public commentators and independent analysts and believers with curiosity and access to public data often react faster. Candace Owens, with a platform and network, sifted through social media chatter, donor pressure allegations, and historical patterns of political violence. Commentators, even those from very different ideological backgrounds, have similarly urged patience, calling for transparency rather than satisfying closure. Some looked at past incidents of political violence in the US and even abroad and noted how public pressure, donor influence, and institutional inertia shaped the narrative long before any verdict was reached. That history matters because it gives context. As believers, we are called not to be conformed to the world, but transformed by the renewing of our minds, which means thinking critically, refusing blind partisan pressure, and not settling for the first and incomplete story that has been handed to us. Candace Owens' early assertions deserve a technical breakdown because she didn't just emote publicly over the loss of a friend, but she also laid out a series of anomalies before those same points hit broader public threads. She locked onto the donor pressure angle. In her earlier streams after Charlie Kirk's assassination, she referenced a leaked TPUSA group chat screenshot in which Charlie said that he just lost a $2 million Jewish donor over refusing to cancel Tucker Carlson. That screenshot was later confirmed by it was confirmed authentic by TPUSA spokesperson Andrew Colvert, which gives Candace's initial alarm at least a factual starting point. Her claim wasn't built on feelings, it was built on verified text. She took that data point and immediately plugged it into a pattern she already recognized from past political fractures, powerful donors applying ideological pressure behind closed doors. Whether that connection is meaningful or coincidental is still open. But the fact remains, she saw the donor leak before most people even knew that it existed. She layered on another major anomaly: the Egyptian registered aircraft flying near Utah airport around the time of the shooting. She noted the timing, the repetition, and flagged it, at least, as unusual. Officials have confirmed that they found no link between those flights and the murder, but her instinct to correlate timing was not irrational. It was simply an aggressive form of open source intelligence work. And then came the rapid personnel changes across investigators, the presiding judge, and nearby corporate leadership connected to regional logistics. Again, none of these pieces prove anything yet, but Candace's method in surfacing them early, laying them out, and forcing scrutiny is exactly why dissenters tend to spot structural inconsistencies before institutions publish their final narratives. Why dissenters often detect structural inconsistencies faster than official investigators is not complicated. It is structural. Outsiders have no legal protocol, no chain of command, no requirement to withhold unconfirmed leads, and no pressure to preserve public calm when a politically sensitive death occurs. Candace, for example, rapidly harvested publicly available documents, corporate filings, flight tracking metadata, event security briefings, archive posts, donor disclosures, and local reporting. She could draw hypotheses within hours because she has no legal obligation to prove them, only to propose them. The flexibility lets her move at a pace that law enforcement simply cannot. Police and prosecutors must meet the burden of evidence, follow constitutional guardrails, verify claims through chain of custody procedures, and filter out what cannot stand in court. So while Candace could go on her podcast and say that she believed that Charlie was publicly executed, investigators could only release the facts available at that moment, right? A rooftop shot, a suspect in custody, and no confirmed foreign involvement, at least for now. Perhaps things will change later. Then, if they do, hooray, right? The contrast in speed creates the impression that dissenters see more, but often they're just allowed to speculate more broadly. Still, it's worth noting that historical reality that covert operations, both failed and successful, were often hinted at by outsiders before formal investigations caught up. That historical precedent inevitably colors how viewers interpret Candace's urgency. But as Christians, we are commanded to avoid bearing false witness. Of course, in Proverbs 19, it warns that a false witness will not go unpunished. That warning is precisely why we interrogate Candace's claims without dismissing them or swallowing them whole. It is possible that investigators did notice the same anomalies and simply haven't disclosed their conclusions yet. It's equally possible that the anomalies are just noise, right? Discernment demands holding both possibilities together without collapsing into paranoia or passivity. Candace Owens' track record is central here because her history shapes why millions of people take her instincts seriously, even when official reports contradict her interpretations. Sometimes. Over the past decade, she has built a reputation as someone who exposes political hypocrisy and documents what she sees as institutional manipulation. Her critics say that she promotes conspiracy theories. Her supporters call her a pattern recognizer with a high hit rate on political deception. Both sides agree on one thing: she spots contradictions early. That is part of why her take on Charlie Kirk's death hit so hard. She wasn't just another commentator, she was a friend inside the same movement, someone with personal access, with financial context, and ideological alignment. When she saw the donor message, she immediately tied it to the long standing tension between Charlie's pro Israel public posture and the subtle shifts that some insiders claim he had been wrestling with. She referenced his uneasiness about certain alliances and framed it not merely as politics but as spiritual warfare, drawing on the idea that truth is always contested in environments of power. Critics quickly pushed back, noting that not one of her broader claims has been proven, but the fact that major outlets confirmed the donor screenshot, the awkward security vulnerabilities, and the repeated Egyptian jet appearances gives her at least some factual scaffolding. Whether she has correctly interpreted those facts is another matter. Okay? What matters for us is motive. Candace believes Charlie would want max scrutiny because he publicly told Tucker Carlson he wanted the truth pursued without fear. That context explains her intensity. It doesn't validate all of her theories, but it fully explains why she refuses to back down. And that intensity, historically, is part of why she is sometimes right long before institutions catch up. When you zoom out and actually look at the pattern, the through line becomes impossible to ignore. The people who spot structural inconsistencies early are not necessarily guessing. They are reading the system the way a mechanic listens to an engine that is off long before it breaks. That's essentially what made Candace's early observations matter, not because they were loud, but because they were logically coherent long before anyone else was willing to acknowledge that something didn't add up. And when you stack her record against other serious commentators who make their living dissecting political behavior, people who map incentives and timelines and institutional habits, you start to see the same pattern. The dissenters who are grounded in evidence, not simply ideology, consistently notice the fracture points first. They aren't clairvoyant, they're simply not invested in the illusion. That's the core of what I want you to take from this. We're not elevating personalities, we're dissecting a model of discernment, a way of seeing, a way of listening, a way of standing in a world that constantly tries to overwhelm you with narratives instead of facts. And this is where your identity in Christ becomes more than a comforting phrase, it becomes a functional advantage. Scripture repeatedly trains believers to watch the fruit, to test the spirits, to weigh the claims, evaluate the patterns, and stay rooted in truth, even when the crowd is sprinting in the opposite direction. Discernment is not mystical, it's disciplined clarity. So the real takeaway isn't just that Candace saw what others missed. The takeaway today is that you can learn to see like that too. You can be measured and grounded and unshaken, willing to follow evidence even when it is inconvenient. That's what it means to walk in truth. That's what it means to avoid deception. And that's what it means to live awake in a world that benefits when you are asleep.